Game theory. If anyone's watched the game theory, there's a cool like outro like, but hey, that's just a theory, game theory. So one big assumption that we make is that people are rational. They think a lot. I know that you know that I know that you know, that whole thing. So that's one thing to just keep in mind, that people will know different information, and people want to maximize, for the most part, if they are rational, their payoff. So how much money am I getting, or how much money am I losing? And then these games could be played after another or just once. Um, and one thing to keep in mind with these game theory, these strategies, is there's a dominant strategy if no matter what you do, I'm going to do this thing. So no matter what you do, if I do the exact same thing, that's a dominant strategy. It doesn't matter what you do, I'm going to do the same thing. That's a dominant strategy. And then for a prisoner's dilemma to happen, there has to be a dominant strategy solution. So both people have to have this dominant strategy, what they would want to do. But there exists another outcome that will give us both higher payoffs. So this is the prisoner's dilemma, where I want, how it goes is, I want to rat you out and you want to rat me out, and then we both lose, as opposed to both cooperating, because we both have dominant strategies and there's a solution outside of that equilibrium that gives us both better outcomes. So that's the definition of prisoner's dilemma. Okay, now Nash equilibrium can be a little confusing, but how I like to approach it is you basically are taking it from two different sides. So from one side, I'm going to say, okay, what if this player plays left? What is my response going to be? And then you consider, okay, if this player plays right, what is my response going to be? So you take those, you kind of write down those matchups, and then you take it from the other side. Okay, if this player plays right, what am I going to do? If this player plays left, what am I going to do? So you take all kind of those four combinations, and then you see, do any of those combinations match up? Where if I'm playing right, um, if I'm playing right, they want to play left, and if they're playing left, I want to play right. If any of those combinations match up, boom, that's a Nash equilibrium. Sometimes there can be one of them, sometimes there can be multiple of them, and sometimes you can kind of have this weird thing where you flip-flop between with mixed equilibriums. But that's essentially how you approach it, how you determine whether or not there is a Nash equilibrium, is taking it from each side and then seeing if those combinations actually match up. It's oftentimes saying, like, if you can't improve your situation based on the choice of the other player. So we kind of go through this example here in the slides if you wanted to look into a bit more into it, of where they end up in a position where no firm could change one choice to be better off based in the scenario that they're in. So you can have multiple equilibria. So this is where there's kind of two possible scenarios that we could end up in, and one we could maybe discuss beforehand, called cheap talk, of like, hey, I think that we should pick this because we should. But there's always a risk that if you're doing that, the other person's going to be like, oh yeah, yeah, for sure, I'll do that. But then they backstab you, and then they pick the one that's going to give them the higher payoff. So that's why it's called cheap talk, because might be able to talk the talk, but you might not walk the walk. So that's cheap talk. And then the Pareto criterion is basically where they have multiple equilibria, but then one of them gives both firms a better payoff than the other one. And then due to the Pareto criteria, both firms will kind of select that one because it's better off for them. So then it's better off for both of them. And then that's what happens. So that's Pareto criterion. Okay, and then mixed strategies, essentially, these are coming in where someone picks between options based on a probability, a certain probability, and that probability essentially has to make it so that the other player is indifferent between their options. So that probability will make it so the other player's expected value between their two options is equal. So if you're given a question where it says, is this probability going to have a mixed strategy equilibrium, you have to calculate, okay, what would be the other player's expected value between the two, and it has to be indifferent, so it has to be equal between those two options. And sometimes you can have pure strategy and mixed together, but just keep in mind that you want the other player to be indifferent between the two strategies in order for it to be a mixed strategy equilibrium. And you calculate that based on having the same expected value using the multiplication with the probability. Um, and so sometimes you can kind of have the same here. So we have mixed and pure. strategy equilibria together here, and we kind of have multiple Nash equilibriums, and then you'd be given kind of that probability that would make it indifferent between choosing the two. Okay, but what happens if I don't know that you know, or maybe I don't trust you that you know? So this is where we get into rationality, and sometimes what we would expect to be the best thing due to these expected payoffs doesn't actually happen because people are risk adverse, or they're scared that you're going to do something else. You're scared that someone is going to do something that's going to hurt you a lot, and that's where, yes, we can calculate all this in theory, but then in actuality, if people aren't rational, they might do something completely different. And then another thing is information. So I might not know for sure what your payoff for one of these things would be, or I might not know for sure what you're going to do. So then I don't have complete information, so my choice isn't as good as it would be, and it might be different than it would be in theory. So since the payoffs aren't public information, people don't know what the Nash equilibrium would be, and they don't want to lose out on that minus 20, so they end up not investing. And it just kind of gets a bit more tricky, where you just have to keep in mind that not everyone's going to be rational, and not all information is going to be known. And then because of this, some people will approach, okay, how can I minimize my loss possible? And this is called the maximum solution. So essentially you say, okay, which choice can I make that will maximize or minimize the loss that I will be making? So your maximum minimum payoff. That's why it's called maximin. So essentially you kind of find the minimum payoff for each of your choices, and then find the one that's the highest between the minimum payoff of there. And then what happens if both firms approach this strategy? Then you have the maximum solution, which might not be the best solution for both of them, but it's the one where they are most risk averse. Okay, so that's what happens if we do it once, kind of this static. But for dynamic games, multiple times, you kind of go back and forth, and you have a turn, another turn, another turn. So you have these actions, and then combine those together, you have an overall strategy. And there's different strategies that you can do. One is, imagine like a 6-year-old kid that's just really mad, really upset, gets into a temper tantrum. If you piss him off, he's gonna be mad for the rest of life. So if you pick a choice that hurts them, so they're gonna start off playing a good strategy, but then if you kind of punish them, then that little kid is just gonna punish you for the rest of the terms. They're always gonna pick the one that'll kind of give you the lowest outcome. So that's kind of the trigger strategy. Whereas the tit for tat is a more mature, calm, zen person. They're just gonna say, I'm gonna start off high, I'm gonna start off nice, and then I'm just gonna follow what you do. So copy your move from the previous round. And that's tit for tat. You do this, I'll do that next. You do this, I'll do that next. And sometimes that can equal into equilibrium if they both approach that strategy. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we move into Stackelberg, which is similar to where you decide on your quantities, but now it's in a sequential way. And the way you approach this is, you have your leader, they pick first, and then your follower, they pick second. But to evaluate it, you're actually going to do the reverse. So you're going to look at the follower. You're going to say, okay, follower, if I'm the follower and the leader does this, what am I going to choose? If I'm the follower and the leader picks the middle option, what am I going to choose? If I'm the follower, and for the last one. And then so you have these list of 3 outcomes based on what the leader would do. And then the leader is going to look at that, and they're going to say, okay, I know the follower is going to do this and this and this. Which of those choices gives me the highest outcome, knowing that the follower is going to do that strategy? And then that's going to kind of end up being that solution for the Stackelberg game. Because the leader wants to maximize its profit based on what it knows the follower is going to do. And this, as you can see here, is illustrated by the green path, because the follower, it's yellow, picks its best options regardless of what the leader does. And then the leader says, okay, I don't want 2, I don't want 5, I want 12. I'm going to pick that one. And that's going to be the solution for this one. And then these are just kind of showing that, okay, all of these different solutions, so like if they were to go to 20 and 10, these are all kind of sub-game perfect. So just like the combination of this equals that sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium. What if I say, oh, if you pick this, oh, I'm going to pick something that's going to give you nothing? Well, these are threats, and sometimes they can be credible and sometimes they're not. Credible threats, essentially, one can be done by you actually doing it. So if you do the threat, you act, that kind of shows credibility. But then if not, if you go at the same time or once, you wouldn't make a threat which would give you a lower payoff than it would of not doing the threat, because that just wouldn't make sense to you. So a threat won't be credible if I say, oh, I'm going to pick the solution that gives us none, if I could pick the solution that gives me 5, because that's just not credible unless I actually do it and I'm irrational. And then so another thing to keep in mind is entry deterrence. So essentially, there's a few different ways to kind of block someone from entering. One is it's like too much of a commitment to enter, or by entering, they have to invest a lot, and that investment is going to be greater than their profit. So if F is greater than 4, the second player, move 2, isn't going to want to enter because they're just going to be losing money. So that's kind of a blockaded entry by having too high of that barrier to enter. And then another one could be deterred, is I like slip a 20 under the table and I say, hey, don't sell lemonade here. And you're like, okay, great. 20, that's pretty good. That's, more than I would be making if I were to enter. And so you agree to do it. And then I get to sell all the lemonade and I make money. And I would only do that if the difference between what I would make if you entering, so 10, versus what I would make if you are entering, if it's smaller than that. So in this case, if B is greater than 6, so if I had to slip you a 7, I wouldn't want to block you from entering, because then I would be losing out money instead of just letting you enter. And then lastly, if I'm super nice, I'm like, hey, please don't sell lemonade here. I worked my whole life selling lemonade here. And then you agree. That's kind of accommodated entry. So just kind of help me out. Or if you want to sell lemonade here, I can like, okay, sure, I'll be nice. And then another thing is just having pure scale. So everyone's favorite app, Temu, just can sell items at such a cheap rate because their marginal cost is just so low. They undercut the prices of everyone else, which makes it really hard to compete with them. This is another form of entry deterrence, because they can just keep the prices so low, no one else can compete with them, because it's lower than the person who would enter's marginal cost. Okay, so the hold up problem is essentially saying, hey, you're gonna come to this place and make a really large investment, and then because you made that large investment, you're gonna want to stick here, you want to stay here, but then I can do something that'll jack up the price for you or take more money from you and try to maximize how much money I could take from you. And I like to think of it as, if I come in and say, hey, I want to buy a private island. So Patrick will sell me this private island. I'm like, great. I just spent a whole bunch of money on this private island. That's great. But then I find out that the only way to get to this private island is for Patrick to drive me in a boat. And now Patrick, he knows that I spent a lot of money on this private island and I like my beaches. So I want to go to this private island. And Patrick knows this. So he's like, hey, rather than charging like $100 for a boat ride, I'm going to charge you like $1,000 per boat ride. He's going to jack up that price. And then I'm really sad because I still want to visit my private island, but now it costs a lot more. So this is kind of the hold-up problem, the hold-up scenario where someone takes advantage of this massive investment that someone made, and they jack up the price and earn more money from it. Or it could be similar where I buy a pizza oven, and then if they jack up the price, like my rent, so much that it's actually cheaper for me to kind of go somewhere else, then I'll just leave. So if Patrick starts charging me way too much money, you best believe I'm buying another private island. So what we learned from this is that I'm going to have 2 private islands. Okay, so a few different types of behavioral games. This is a bit more into the psychology aspect. Essentially, it's kind of thinking about what people will actually do as opposed to what the theory says. And one of them is, if you do something that's going to insult me and that's going to be greedy, and I don't like that, so I'm going to pay you. I'm going to make sure you get like eye for an eye. I'm gonna try to pay you back. So one of them is the ultimatum game, where it's like, you have a set amount of money, you can decide how much money you want to give to me, and then I have to accept it, and then we both get it, or I reject it, and then we both get nothing. So in theory, I should give just like $1 to you because that's better for you, and then I get everything. But once again, you're gonna be like, hey, that's insulting, that's greedy. I'm gonna screw you over, we both get nothing. So in reality, it's a bit different than how it would work in theory. And then another one is, oh, everyone guess a number. You'll get paid if you're 2/3 of the average value. And then everyone starts trying to think that they're super smart, like Einstein. So like, if everyone guesses randomly, 2/3 of 50, that'd be okay. That'd be 33. So then if everyone's gonna guess that, then I'm gonna take 2/3 of that, and then it keeps going down and going down because everyone thinks they're smarter than the other person, and it kind of keeps going. And then the like Nash equilibrium of this would be where you guess 0 because it's just gonna kind of keep getting lower. But again, that kind of varies in practice where people might overestimate or underestimate the intelligence of the other people in the game.